So, what is your name and relation to Puerto Rico?
My name is Tony. I worked in Puerto Rico and was a resident for 2 years.
What are your thoughts about residents of Puerto Rico being United States citizens but not having any influence in electing a United States president?
I think that's, in a nutshell, really not fair because even though Puerto Ricans are citizens of the United States, being a citizen should mean that you should be able to vote to have representation in government because in America that's why they revolted against England because they didn't have representation and had any representation when England made laws and taxes. Just like Puerto Rico doesn't have representation and can't vote for who they want in government.
Why do you think the United States does not allow citizens in its territories to vote and influence federal elections?
Well, it's probably based on the old laws of territories and like Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, Samoa, and those islands that are territories and haven't become full states. It's just the old laws that have been around for quite a while that are the reason for that, but they just haven't ever become states for whatever reason.
Based on your experience, does Puerto Rico deserve greater recognition or more rights for their military service for the United States?
I don't know that they really deserve greater recognition because they're all recognized as veterans of the war. And many Puerto Ricos, when I was there, people would say that in proportion, a greater proportion of Puerto Ricans were drafted than on the mainland of the United States into the Vietnam War and other wars. So, but I think their recognition is that they get recognition just like veterans here too. Although because I think it's a territory, I think overall they're not as well respected for their service because they're serving, they also are part of Puerto Rico and there's a Puerto Rico nationalism that is not always as connected with the United States just because they're a territory and not a full state.
Should the United States do more to help Puerto Rico economically?
I think so a little bit. I mean, Puerto Rico gets help from the United States with different programs, federal programs like SNAP and different assistance programs already. But at the same time, they can't vote for those programs, and that might be part of the reason if Puerto Rico does have a very large poverty level on the island, so that might be one reason why there's not as many government programs are not as fully funded as if Puerto Rico would be a state. So in that way, I think Puerto Rico should be funded more with the government programs.
How have you seen neo-imperialization or current expansion of influences by the United States in Puerto Rico economically, politically, and or culturally?
Well, I'm not sure. Well, I think Puerto Rico was being a nation, and that I think just the United States, I think being on the mainland, there's neo-imperialism, I guess more socially, might be the biggest aspect because there probably are quite a few. I think there's a lot of United States citizens on the mainland who don't even understand that Puerto Ricans are citizens of the United States. They think they're another country or they're just part of Latin America or something like that. And that social aspect, I think, kind of creates a misconception about what Puerto Rico is and their contribution to the United States and the history of the United States. So socially, I think is a big part of neo-imperialism because they're saying that Puerto Ricos really aren't full citizens and things like that. Just that kind of misconception impacts the other parts, the economic part for fully funding Puerto Rico, for economic part for development in Puerto Rico and things like that. I think just there's like it's a stereotype or some kind of idea of what Puerto Ricans and their relationship with citizens of the United States are. So I think socially, that neo-imperialism, I guess, attitude or just misunderstanding of American citizens of the mainland boils over and has a ripple effect into the economic and other neo-imperialism aspects of Puerto Rico, where Puerto Rico is just kind of treated not as fully respected as anybody in a state in the United States would be treated.
Why do you think Puerto Rico should or should not become a state?
I'm not sure. I was only a resident there for 2 years, and I mean, most of the people of Puerto Rico don't like the way things are now. They don't like being in the middle between almost a state but not a state, or an independent nation. They don't really want that either necessarily, because being associated with the United States as a territory really does have a lot of advantages for them, because of the funding and the protection, the military, and all that. It helps Puerto Rico a lot, but at the same time, it's not completely fair compared to a state, because they don't have the representation that a state does in the government and self-government. So if I think, should Puerto Rico become a state? I'm not sure. Puerto Rico has a rich kind of national history too, that they would lose. Like, for instance, the language of Puerto Rico would have to be officially English, and all their government documents, historic documents, are in Spanish, and everything they do now are Spanish, and people everywhere talk Spanish. Their official languages are Spanish and English together, both, but Spanish is spoken 99% of the time by everybody around Puerto Rico. So losing their own language, a lot of people would have to be taught English, things like that. There would be a change, a cultural change in Puerto Rico for them to become a state. So I guess when that's ready to happen, then I guess Puerto Rico should become a state whenever that happens.
Do you have anything else to add about your experience with Puerto Rico, or anything about Puerto Rico from what you know about it?
Well, the people of Puerto Rico are really, I mean, they've been in this situation for a long time, and they're very friendly people and a very close-knit, family-oriented culture. So they really support each other, and politics and being a state or nation has been a very big issue for them. They've taken several votes even recently on should Puerto Rico be a state, a territory, or an independent nation. And it's very divided. Most people want Puerto Rico to be just the same status quo, because they're not ready to make a full commitment to be a state yet and to have that change. But they also don't like the fact that they can't be represented in government like any other state too, because Puerto Rico really feels the United States does control things, where they don't have a say like they would as if they were a state, to having 2 senators and representation like that. So so that's a very different part of being in Puerto Rico. And personally, even though I grew up in the United States and the mainland and everything, when I was in Puerto Rico, there was a presidential election, and I couldn't even vote for that because I was a resident of Puerto Rico, just because I moved down there. And that really isn't, I don't think, fair socially, just because somebody lives in a different part of the United States, that they can't vote. So I think that's the main thing that people should maybe consider when they think about, should Puerto Rico be a state or have the rights of a state.
Thank you.
You're welcome.